Hey guys, YouTuber 100 here. Alright, and now here I am with another Star Trek movie review. Now here I am with a review of Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. So, out of all the Star Trek movies that I have watched before, I would probably say that this one may be my favorite out of the ones that I've watched. I mean, I said before that Wrath of Khan is probably the best of the franchise, but this one is actually my favorite. Yeah, it was this is kind of like what I was saying before when I reviewed X-Men Days of Future Past, how there's a difference between the best and favorite. Yeah, yeah, I would probably say that's the case here with this one being my favorite Star Trek movie out of the one I've seen. I mean, I just really do seem to enjoy this one the most out of all the ones that I have looked at so far, all the ones I've seen. I mean, yeah, this is like another one that really did seem to do pretty well. I mean, a lot of people really did seem to like it. And of course, like this movie does have like a lot of like good humor to it. Like there's some funny scenes in the movie. So yeah, there's that, and yeah, it's just like a pretty good movie. Yeah. Yeah, this is the last film that actually continues with the story arc that has been in the previous two films. Yeah, that story arc finishes off in this film. And yeah, this film, it does have kind of like a different premise than the other Star Trek films do. With this film, they actually like spend a lot of it in like the modern Earth, well, the modern Earth that they spent time in, like the year that this movie was released, so 1986. So yeah, they spend most of the time like in like the present day rather than in the future in space. So yeah, it was kind of interesting to see like Star Trek take on like a different and like premise for their films, and pretty much like a different premise in like Star Trek altogether. And and I don't know. I think that may be why, like, while this is like one of the like most well liked Star Trek movies, there are some people that really do not seem to like this movie. Like, I've seen some people kind of say that this movie was horrible, and yeah, even like my brother, he really doesn't like this film. I think that this film is only second to the first one as his least favorite of the franchise, and I just don't see why. I mean, this is a good movie. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it has a lot of good humor into it. I mean, it just has a really good story to it. Yeah, I mean, I just really don't see what it is. I mean, maybe it's just because of like most of it is takes place like in the modern Earth. So I'm not sure if that's the reason why, but for a Star Trek movie in modern Earth, I mean, this movie is done pretty well. Yeah, so I'm really not sure what it is people really don't like about it. With the people that don't like it. Yeah, I'm not really sure what it is. Maybe it's just because of that. But yeah, this is definitely a good movie. I would probably give this film 3.5 stars out of 4. I mean, yeah, and of course, like, there's still, like, the recurring cast in this movie. There's still William Shatner as Kirk, Leonard Nimoy as Spock, and, yeah, all the crew members all the cast that played the crew still return, like DeForest Kelley and Walter Cohen and George Takei, and yeah, pretty much everybody else. So yeah, and of course also this movie does feature Catherine Hicks, and yeah, of course like so a joke that I kind of made about this was since like the first film had Stephen Collins who played Decker in the movie, who was the father on Seventh Heaven, and this movie has Catherine Hicks, who was also the mother in Seventh Heaven. I like made a joke about it on a Seventh Heaven video, saying that Decker and Dr. Taylor like end up marrying, and so the kids on Seventh Heaven must be half Vulcan. Yeah, and kind of a joke I made, and yeah, even like Nostalgia Critic kind of joked about it in the beginning of his review for Final Frontier, recapping this movie. So yeah, that was kind of interesting. But yeah, pretty much, yeah, still like the same recurring cast, and yeah, once again, this movie's under the direction of Leonard Nimoy. And yeah, Leonard Nimoy definitely does do a good job with the direction of this film. Yeah, definitely like a better direction job than Search for Spock, even though Search for Spock was good too. Yeah, this one is definitely a better film than Search for Spock. Yeah, so yeah, like I said, I give this 3.5 stars out of 4. Yeah, definitely a really good and enjoyable movie. Alright, so yeah, let me just get right into it. Alright, so the movie opens up with like it just has like a huge like probe moving through space, and it's sending out like a, a signal that disables powers of the other ships that it passes, and it's starting to take up orbit around Earth, and it the ship's signal actually ends up disabling the power grid and starts to generate some planetary storms. And then it starts to create like a sun blocking cloud cover. And then yeah, the Starfleet just ends up like sending out like a distress calls and warns like other ships not to approach Earth. And then meanwhile, like on the planet Vulcan, it shows like the crew members of the Enterprise are just like ending up like in exile after the events of Search for Spock. And it's showing that like Spock is still like recovering from his resurrection and like still trying to regain his memories. And yeah, and then like they renamed the bird of prey Klingon vessel the Bounty. And it turns out like the crew members are wanted for trial after like what they did in Search for Spock. And eventually like the warning from Starfleet ends up reaching them. Um, and they discover like the probe signal, and then Spock comes to like a conclusion that the signal from the probe actually ends up matching the song of humpback whales who are now extinct. And Spock also ends up like determining the that Havoc will continue to wreck until like the call all from the signal ends up being answered. And so then Kirk decided to use the ship to actually go back in time to return to a time where the humpback whales exist, and to bring the whale into the future with them to answer the signal of the probe. And so then, and as they are about to head off, Kirk then assigns missions for the crew. Spock and Kirk are to locate the whales, and then Scott, McCoy, and Sulu, their job was to construct a tank in order to hold the whales that they'll need. And then Uhura and Chekhov were to find a nuclear reactor or for the energy leakage to enable the power of their ship to be restored. And so then they ended up time traveling back to 1986 San Francisco. Oh, and they end up like putting their like cloaking their ship into like the San Francisco Bay area, or like in an area near that. Yeah, they just end up like hiding the ship, cloaking it in the Golden Gate Park in San Francisco near the bridge. Yeah, and then it's funny, like there was a point where like Kirk and Spock were like on a bus, and there was this guy like playing music really loud, and like everybody else on the bus wanted it to be quiet, and then like Spock just ended up like pinching the guy in the neck, and then the guy just ended up like passing out, and everybody was just applauding Spock for that. Yeah. And then eventually, like Spock and Kirk eventually arrive at an aquarium, and they join a tour who was guided by Dr. Gillian Taylor. And then, yeah, Gillian was then just showing people around the aquarium. And then they eventually discover, like, that there are two whales who were, like, humpback whales. Whales, and then Dr. Taylor eventually just announced that the two of them would eventually be released into the wild. And yeah, she was just explaining that they were going to be unable to care for the whales anymore, and so they have no choice but to release them. And then, like the Dr. Taylor was continuing on with the tour, it showed that Spock was like inside of the water with the whales. And then like he eventually was spotted, and then Spock just ended up telling Dr. Taylor like one of the whales was pregnant, and then Spock and Kirk then eventually left. They eventually came across Dr. Taylor again, and then she gave them a ride, and then she was just like questioning how Spock knew that the whale was pregnant. And yeah, they were just like talking about some how like their mission or like with the whales and stuff, and she was like beginning to question how they really knew all the stuff. And yeah, she also like heard Spock calling Kirk Admiral, and she was wondering why Spock did that. And then Kirk just wanted to talk to Dr. Taylor about it over dinner. And so then eventually Kirk and Dr. Taylor end up like going to dinner in an Italian restaurant. And yeah, and while they were like talking, Kirk ended up like receiving some calls from the other crew to give him updates on stuff. And then and eventually Dr. Taylor eventually like discovered that Kirk was like from space and stuff. And then yeah, Kirk was just ended up like trying to ask her some more about the whales and when they were being released, and then she told Kirk that they would be released the following day at noon. And then eventually, then Kirk ended up just revealing to Dr. Taylor who he is and why he's there and his mission and stuff. And eventually, then Kirk just was trying to ask about the tracking frequency for the whales, but eventually Dr. Taylor just didn't want to continue on with Kirk. Then she eventually dropped him back off in the Bay Park, or the Golden Gate Park. Why do I keep saying Bay? And also, like, with the other crew, like, Scott McCoy and Sulu ended up, like trading, like, a transparent aluminum formula for what they needed for the whale tank. And also, Yura and Chekhov ended up locating, like, a nuclear power ship, which was, like, the aircraft carrier Enterprise. And they ended up, like, obtaining the power that they needed to get, but they eventually ended up being discovered on the ship. And then Yura is beamed back to his ship, but Chekhov actually ended up being captured, and as he was trying to escape, he ended up, like, getting severely injured. And then the next day, as Dr. Taylor arrived back at the aquarium, she discovered that the whales had actually been released earlier than scheduled. And then she just ended up going back to Kirk for some help. And then she was eventually beamed onto the ship. And then they all then just learned about where Chekhov was, that he had been injured and he was actually in a hospital. And so then Kirk, McCoy, and Dr. Taylor just ended up like going to rescue Chekhov. They went to the hospital dressed up as doctors, and they like snuck into the operating room where Chekhov was, and they locked the other doctors in a closet, and then they ended up then reviving Chekhov, and then they just like and then wheeled him out, and then yeah, there were just like a bunch of hijinks where they were being chased by some cops trying to get out of the hospital. And as they took the elevator, they were then beamed back up onto the where the location of the ship was in the Golden Gate Park. And then like the crew was like McCoy and Chekhov were beamed onto the ship, and then like Kirk was trying to say goodbye to Dr. Taylor. Dr. Taylor wanted to go with Kirk, but he was telling her that she had to stay. But then, as Kirk was being beamed up, Dr. Taylor grabbed onto him, and so she ended up being boarded on the ship also. And then they went after the whales, and then ended up then and transporting them aboard the ship too. And then they returned back to their own time with Dr. Taylor. And then once they arrived on Earth, the ship then just lost all power. But the whales ended up being released, and then they responded to the signal of the probe. And then that ended up like causing the probe to just reverse the effects onto Earth and then return back to the space depths. And then there was the court hearing for the Enterprise crew. And then it was announced that all the charges except for the insubordination charge was dropped. But that one was just directed towards Kirk for disobeying the superior officer. And as a result of that, Kirk ended up being demoted from the admiral position down to just back to the captain. And then Kirk was then just returned to the command of the starship. And then everybody would just then went back to their ships, but then Dr. Taylor ended up like aborting another ship besides the Enterprise. Or the starship, yeah. And she just said that she would see Kirk another time. And so then the crew then just ended up departing on their new ship, the USS Enterprise NCC-1701A. And they ended up just taking off into space on a new mission, and yeah, that's how the movie ended. So, yeah, 3.5 stars out of 4. I mean, yeah, like I said, out of the Star Trek movies I've seen so far, this one's my favorite one. You know, I mean, yeah, definitely like a really good story and a lot of good comedy to it. So yeah, definitely like one of the stronger Star Trek films, and yeah, definitely a good movie. Alright, so yeah, that does it for my review of Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and yeah, next up, looking at one that, yeah, like I said before, is debatable to be the worst Star Trek movie, and yeah, not really looking forward to watching that one or reviewing it, but yeah, that one will be coming up next. Alright, so, but anyway, yeah, does it for a review of Star Trek 4, so yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.